Phil Collins is the singer of In the Air, the face of Genesis and the man tonight who played drums and defined an age but for. There is a rock in every stadium he played in. Tale that makes him wish he had stayed backstage, even though she had a career full of hits. The Grammys and Disney fame. Collins somehow become one of music's major favorite people to hit, whether it's the soft pop sound of his being everywhere in the 1980s or just a poor personality clash sound. Friends haven't had just kept their feelings to. We're not just talking about them for fun. Here are some of these full-on fights without being mean. Interviews, tense encounters at. There is one famous building in Buckingham Palace case of being blamed for destroying a reunion of Led Zeppelin. You'd recognize some of the names on this list. Don't think they won't hold a grudge. Other people, well, you'll see. Who called him the beast of music, who had a decades-long grudge over one sarcastic say and who stormed out of a small island bar to stay away from him. Let's get split into 5 singers who did not like Phil Collins and did not afraid to say it. Jimmy Page, the drum player who almost sank the whole thing in the history of rock. Not many groups have gone as horribly wrong or stayed as bad as the one between Phil Collins, Jim Page, and what should have been a happy meeting at Live Aid in 1985 turned into an infamous mess. A feud that has been going on for decades. Egos were hurt by misunderstandings, and one very public breakdown on stage. Phil Collins was done with a set with Sting, was in London and was ready to act in Philadelphia the same day thanks to a fast Concorde trip. But what Collins thought about the chopper ride would be a chill jam with friends quickly became a lot more. I really thought it was only going to be low-key, Collins told Q magazine after the fact. When I got there, I was a square peg in a round hole. Round hole. He thought he'd be having fun with Plant and Page, as some people may be running through a song or two from Plant's solo work, changing how Led Zeppelin plays on the world's largest stage, but somewhere in the invite people and carry out the plan changed, and Collins was now a part of when Led Zeppelin got back together with almost no practice and no science. Collins was being blind, he didn't know how to run through with the band. He used to listen to Zeppelin tracks him as he flies across the Atlantic and went into a fake hotel room. Practice less than 2 hours ahead of time. This time, Robert said, it didn't go well. Collins said that Jimmy Page is angry. Page from Classic Rock says, we've been, and I told them, I saw your. It was my first show in London, so I know what to expect. Page replies, no, it doesn't go that way right away. Collins and Page didn't match up. In terms of music and relationships, the Collins could feel how annoyed he was. Pushed Page deep into the pressure of Collins didn't seem ready at the time. Not polished, and the vibe was bad. There was a before the first note of the set. 3 songs that try to be magic rock and roll up a lot of love, and the stairs to Plant's screams went to heaven but nothing landed. Were shaking, and Page's guitar tone wasn't right. The setup with 2 drums between Collins and Thompson was confused. Well-known rock and roll, one of the most famous Zeppelin openers, started to fall apart right away. The drummer could not get the start of rock and roll. Things were going badly for us. That's what Page told the Sunday Times. After many years, at the end of the day he didn't know what we were playing, a lot of love, and he was just hitting her away without a clue and grinning. Page never talked about Collins by name in talks. It was clear who he was at the time blamed. He kept bringing up the drummer who couldn't be reached, wasn't ready, and almost sank the whole thing. There was so much wrong with the show that there was no way for Led Zeppelin to be part of the official Live Aid DVD when it came out in 2004. They wanted to bury it. Collins has never liked being called a scapegoat. Finally replied, if I would have left if I could have done, he said many years later. But we would all talk about why Phil Collins quit Live Help, so I just stuck with it. In his book Not Dead Yet, he talked about the event as humiliating and tiring on my emotions. I might not have known I was mad as I did, as well as he wanted me to, but I became the center of attention, and it looked like I showed off. He didn't deny that. He didn't say that the show wasn't good, that he might have been more ready. Collins couldn't forgive, though, the idea that he was the only one who had sunk the ship. Robert wasn't a good fit for Jimmy, lost his voice and was not himself. He said to Q, it wasn't my fault. It was rubbish. While Collins moved, Page never really let it go. even when it was late as 2021, he said again in talks that it wasn't very smart to have Live Aid back together. Again putting a lot of blame on Collins's bears the irony of the band's 1988. This time it was with John Bonham's son. It wasn't much better with Jason on drums. Another round of bad reviews for the show until they got back together at Arena in 2007 to 2008. That Zeppelin with Jason one more time, they were happy that they finally made a comeback. But Collins still had to carry the weight. Roger Waters of the first failure. It looked like Phil Collins was in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The rock world was split between those who wanted to make grand artistic comments and those who agreed with them. Mental State Easy Access. Roger Waters was the brains behind Pink Floyd's most complex albums and powerful political work, The Wall Animals, The Final Cut records with ideas that dealt with war and mental sickness, authoritarianism, and decay of capitalism. Waters saw music as a way to deal with feelings, truth and critique of society by Phil Collins, on the other hand, as it changed from the prog rock drummer to the world's pop stars. Thing that happened after Peter Gabriel left Genesis. Collins took over as lead singer. And then as a solo act, his songs drawn on sadness and personal struggle, hooks that swung out and while they sold million people, which they didn't like. Waters. As Collins's fame went through the roof, Waters barely tried to hide how much he disliked that 1992 Rivers Said Everything in an, he told Musician magazine in an interview, didn't just fire Collins, I seem to always break him down, end up going after poor Phil Collins. She laughed and said that barely he tried to hide his dislike, but it's only symptomatic because he's so easy to see of a lot of it. That's how I feel. Is that he's acting like a author or a rock and roller? It's an act. That's why it's unsatisfying. Waters thought there were two types of songwriters. Like Dylan, Lennon, and those who wrote to fill time on the air. He Collins squarely into the second group. It's not art, Waters went on, because doesn't come from the guts or heart wherever the songs by Lennon or Dylan came from. If you thought about what you were, that is something you would not be able to do. Silly walk behind each other because it would be impossible for you to make fun of it. The silly walk was your work in that way. A dig at Collins's fun shows in his movies. The thing that made him loved by pop fans. To Waters, that artists used self-deprecating charm. Phil Collins never did anything to hurt anyone. Insult for insult, but that didn't work. He didn't know. In an interview, John Edgerton, Collins admitted to being cool with Pink Floyd and other prog friends. I was in a band with that was put in the same way every time box as that lot, but never thought that they were in the same box as him. Agreed that Pink Floyd finally grew on, but I knew about him back in the day what they were doing, but I never was a big fan. Except for Waters, Collins never tried to hide who he really was. Wasn't he aware that he was popular? Accepted pop music and didn't say sorry for it, writing songs like Against All Odds or One More Night, and he let the record play. The sales of more than 150 million around the world as part of Genesis, and as a one artist who can really understand Waters's. If you have anger, you need to know what Collins stood for. Success in the 1980s without having to suffer. At least in Waters, he thought of himself as an artist in pain, a man digging up his past trauma and anger through song. Collins, on the other hand, quickly became a hit on MTV. Everywhere. Collins was on music at live help on shows and even voiceovers for cartoons. Going to be an ape in Disney's Tarzan, everywhere, and to Waters, that was annoying. Waters told the Herald Journal this, said straight out, I find how Phil Collins's presence in my life was annoying. This wasn't about Collins was bad, it was about him being he couldn't get away from water. Anywhere. On the radio and TV while on tour, and that paired with what Waters thought of as it was unbearable how shallow the work was. The dislike didn't end with Passive. In 1989, The Who put on a show called A Fancy Performance of Tommy was put on in New York. Featuring an all-star group that includes Billy Idol, Patti Leal and, you guessed it, Phil. I thought Collins. Waters hated it. Was greatly cut down by the Billy Idol and Patti label were added. Phil Collins. Waters yelled they were _bad even when they offer he couldn't let go of the backhanded praise. Collins is not responsible for what happened. Phil Collins's music is everywhere. Being in my life is annoying anyway. Still, the kid is only a kid. Show, and he was great, but he couldn't even not insult him in a way that started off by praising Paul McCartney. Our little Phil likes the Beatles a lot. Fan rock and roll has a lot of divas fight, but the quiet tension between Paul McCartney and Phil Collins stands out not because it blew up in from the press, but it began with one joke out of the blue and never really healed. Collins, like so many of his generation, looked up to the Beatles as a teen. He even got a Blink and "You'll Miss It" show up in Our Days night as a fan yelling in the crowd after making his own for years. Tradition with Genesis and a great career as a solo artist. Collins his own royal stages, not as a fan, but Collins was a well-known name, so when he ran into McCartney at the gala for Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee party, he went up to him having real respect and a first copy of Hunter Davies's The Beatles. Instead of getting a name, he got a phrase he would never forget: "Oh Heather, our little Phil likes the Beatles a lot." McCartney is said to have told his wife to Collins, "It wasn't cute." Was making the kind of rude comment that doesn't hurt because it's mean, but he later said it was because it was rude. "I thought you," the Sunday Times never forgot it. What went wrong? Collins' most wasn't just a joke, it was the way of thinking behind it. He said in comments that McCartney had an insult meant to make someone feel bad. "He does this thing that makes you, I know this must be hard for I am a bug, so I am not like you." Collins didn't need to be praised as a hero, he just wanted respect. Many years after Collins wrote about the event in his autobiography Not Dead, but McCartney reached out anyway. Collins thought the message wasn't mean. "I didn't get warm, but it wasn't cold either. Flower, I got more of a let's go vibe." We went on with our lives, Collins, but that wasn't enough for him to think McCartney had missed the point or maybe didn't want to understand what hurt so badly at that moment. What makes this fight stand out even more is how Collins talked about George in different ways. Harrison, after Harrison made an error, didn't give him credit for all things he made up with Collins with Must Pass, a joke that was so silly it made people laugh. Collins knew it was personal and appreciated that, no matter how much it cost him. McCartney, there was no laugh and no sharing moment of quiet, and a quote that's Collins's thoughts: "Ever since McCartney was a friend of mine that I wish I hadn't met." He says it's not an insult-based fight or, according to the news, it's a quiet letdown that never went away. A childhood hero who, in as an aside, one thing showed a side Collins did not want to see. They'll never tweet or trade hate tracks, mean things, but in Collins' mind that sign moment said it all. And he, Kurt Cobain, I never really let it go. I hate what he stands for because in the early 1990s there was a huge change making waves in the music world. In the 1980s, leather pants and synths were out, plaid shirts, stress and chaos were in, grunge had come, and at its Kurt Cobain, a messy punk, stood at the front. With a sharp tongue and an ingrained dislike for anything he thought fake or businesslike, including Phil Collins. By the time Nevermind by Nirvana came out, Collins was already a pop icon with hits like In the One More Day in Paradise and On the Air Tonight. He had gone beyond his Genesis prog rock roots and become the face of soft rock and roll. But to Cobain, Collins did more than just play old music, showed what grunge was all about. Going against in an interview in 1992, Cobain let free in Melody Maker what would become one of his well-known rants against another sound engineer on top of the world. The sound had just changed because of Nirvana. A scene that smells like Teen Spirit, but Cobain was already disappointed with the business and ready to name names. "You know what I hate about rock?" asked before letting loose with the words "Nopalm, I hate everything about Phil Collins. I hate tie-dyed t-shirts because I'm a white man's soul. I also wouldn't wear a t-shirt that was tie-dyed unless it was colored with the P of Jerry Garcia's blood and Phil Collins Garcia." It was a bomb-level disc that was enough to hit Collins, the Grateful Dead and What They Did for Money, all of the hippies in one breath. For it's not just music that Cobain Collins didn't like that he stood for. Everything was fake, clean, and professional. Collins had been famous before, he'd Olympics, won Oscars, and became a well-known name, but to Gen X stars like Cobain, he was father rock at its best. The friendly face of a business that Collins wore suits, but it no longer had any edge. Was clean-cut, and he'd been in Disney movies, music videos and songs that were too safe for Cobain's rough tastes. The clash of generations had to happen. The idea behind grunge was to break down the myth of the rock star wasn't taking care of it with songs with a lot of reverb where Collins paid attention to output and emotion. Polish Cobain screamed through distortion pedals that let blood flow. Being honest, the two might have both was at the top of the charts at different points, but as artists, they couldn't have been farther away from his. Phil Collins did not go all the way. Gallagher brother with his defense, he never brought up Cobain's name. The Dirt in talks, but his 1993 solo Both Sides was a quiet record. In response, the record was personal. And minimalist, taped almost the whole by Collins himself. Took off the big. He was known for his production gloss. He seemed to be trying to show that he and music could be raw and emotional, but for many the timing made it worse. It looked like he was trying to stay important. Cobain had already turned the world upside down. Collins still came even though it was upside down. Thought of him as the uncle of rock, called him kind, maybe even smart, but Cobain was out of touch with the times. I didn't just hate Collins because of it wasn't about the music in this case. Collins seemed to show that he had accused him before because they are a sign of yuppie culture. A clean, safe person whose success had been nirvana was built into the system. In Cobain's view, they were trying to destroy. Collins wasn't a danger, he was the elite, which is why he criticized them. More than just a bad review, it was, I don't like his songs. It said, I hate what he stands for. No chance for the two to get back together. Cobain killed himself in 1994, just as the grunge scene was getting bigger. Taken in and possibly weakened by the mainstream, Collins kept on making music with fewer and fewer critics. Reception area and then moved into. Years later, Collins was in a semi-retirement. Thought back on the grunge era with a mix